To get us started today, I was going to introduce the person that's going to introduce our keynote speaker for the breakfast this morning, but I was lucky enough to find someone that was more qualified. So, Mike, roll the film.
Mr. President, I rise today not to talk about Obamacare, not to talk about a shutdown, not to talk about the debate we've been going through the last couple of days, but rather I rise to talk about a man by the name of Chris Carr, who is my Chief of Staff and has been my Chief of Staff since I've been in the United States Senate. Chris will be leaving my office on November 1st to become the Commissioner of Economic Development in the state of Georgia, a tremendous opportunity for him and for my state. Chris joined me in 2003 when I announced to run to replace Zell Miller, who retired as a senator from Georgia. Chris, before that, had been an attorney at Austin Byrd for what he always refers to as a 15-minute brief time period. But he went on from there to be an advisor to the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and a dear friend of ours by the name of T. Rogers Wade, who, by the way, was the executive director for Herman Talmadge and chief of staff years ago in the United States Senate. But I know I would not be where I am today if it weren't for Chris Carr, and I know the state of Georgia is going to go places it never thought it would go because of his guiding leadership as Commissioner of Economic Development. So for a brief minute on the floor of the United States Senate, I want to pay tribute to a friend, a chief of staff, a leader, someone who had a positive influence on my life, but most importantly has had a positive influence on his country, the United States of America. I'm thankful to Chris Carr for his support, and I'm thankful for all he's done for my state and my country and our office. And I yield back my time and defer to the senator from Vermont.
That was filmed this week on the floor of the Senate. And Chris had no idea we were going to do that. He wouldn't have let us. Chris, it's all yours.
For those of y'all that know me, I'm not often speechless, but that was one of those moments where I was. It was very kind of Johnny to do. And I also found out what a photo bomb was as a result of that. I was sitting right behind Senator Coates, and they were going to put out a press release on his speech, and I happened to be right behind him, and his chief of staff said, "Thanks for photo bombing my boss," which I had to go online to find out exactly what that meant. Good morning. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to be back at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Georgia Supreme Court Justice David Nahmias. Justice Nahmias is a native Atlantan who attended Briarcliff High School, where he was the state's star student, Duke University, where he graduated second in his class and summa cum laude, and Harvard Law School, where he graduated magna cum laude and was the editor of the Harvard Law Review. In other words, his academic career and mine have exactly zero in common. In fact, I told him I feel sorry that he got me as the draw to introduce him today, since, as Johnny said, I only practiced for about 15 minutes. Nevertheless, after graduating from law school, Justice Nahmias clerked for Judge Lawrence Silberman of the U.S. Circuit Court for the District Court of Columbia, and for one of my heroes, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. After practicing with Hogan and Hartson in Washington, Justice Nahmias joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta as a federal prosecutor, where, among other things, he worked extensively on the investigation of the Centennial Olympic Park and subsequent bombings that resulted in the indictment of Eric Rudolph. Shortly after the September 11th attacks, Justice Nahmias returned to Washington and became one of the U.S. Justice Department's leading terrorism prosecutors, coordinating the investigation and prosecution of terrorist activity around the United States and in numerous foreign countries, and assisted in counterterrorism policymaking. In 2003, Justice Nahmias was appointed Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division, responsible for supervision of the Counterterrorism Section, the Fraud Section, which included the Enron Task Force, the Appellate Section, and the Capital Case Unit. In 2004, he was nominated by President George W. Bush and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. As U.S. Attorney, Justice Nahmias supervised the prosecution of Eric Rudolph and oversaw the case against former Atlanta Mayor Bill Campbell. In addition, the list of awards he has won could go on for days and days, and he is truly a star in the legal world. Most importantly, though, Justice Nahmias is husband to Catherine and dad to 2 young sons. Now, I've been fortunate to get to know Justice Nahmias over the past few years, and what has impressed me most about him is his integrity, his intellect, and his clarity with which he explains his opinions. Now, as I alluded to above, I am a recovering attorney, so I will readily admit that I do not, as a common practice, find myself reading many legal opinions anymore. But the one I must bring up today is one that is important to the foundation, and one that Justice Nahmias played a critical role in and most clearly exhibited his brilliance as a jurist. During my time at the foundation, one of the issues I dealt with was charter schools. Rogers Kelly, Holly Robinson, and I were fortunate in the early 2000s to play a role in helping to shape and strengthen the charter school law in this state. The foundation now, as then, sees the importance of school choice in public education, and we were and I remain a strong proponent of the charter school movement. As a result, I and many others in this room most likely were disappointed when the Georgia Supreme Court dealt a blow to charter schools a couple of years ago by striking down the State Charter School Commission. I won't get into the details of the case or the decision, but I do want to say that one voice in particular on the court stood out as a strong proponent of charter schools, and that's David Nahmias. Let me strongly encourage you, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, to take the opportunity to use the Google and track down and read Justice Nahmias' brilliant dissent in that particular case. Not only is it one of the most compelling arguments I've ever read for the legal underpinnings of charter schools in Georgia, but it's truly a masterpiece. It not only shows the depth and strength of Justice Nahmias' intellect and his understanding of the fundamental role of the judiciary, but it also shows the gift of clarity that he possesses in writing. So I ask you to join me in welcoming our keynote speaker this morning, Georgia Supreme Court Justice David Nahmias.